Welcome to the Leadership Series. My guest today is Danielle Ballantine, CEO of not-for-profit Your Side and co-founder and co-host of the podcast, The NFP CEO. Welcome, Danielle.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for taking the time to have a chat to me today.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. So, congratulations. The podcast is now officially 1 year old.
Yes.
And you know, you've said that it started after a conversation with your co-founder, Michelle Cutler, that CEOs needed a space for their stories. And I'm really keen to understand what made it a podcast as opposed to a book or a leadership circle. Tell me how you reached that decision.
Well, Michelle and I were talking about reflecting on our own experiences being CEOs, and it originally wasn't discussed first as a book, where we thought, particularly targeted at new CEOs, where there is no sort of like training ground or place that you go to learn to be a CEO. And we had talked about the possibility of a book, but that quickly converted into a podcast for a couple of reasons. Podcasts were becoming increasingly popular. They're a really good channel which to get direct to people really quickly. We didn't know what we were talking about when we thought set up a podcast, and it sounded much easier than a book. And it also meant that when we reflected on our own experiences, we were thinking, well, CEOs are really busy, so they're not going to necessarily sit down and have the time to read a book. But if we can do something in 20 to 30 minutes, it's something that they can hear either in their commute, while they're at the gym, going for a walk, lunchtime, that sort of thing. So we felt that the podcast was much more accessible. We also wanted it to not compete with what's already available. So looking at sort of like CEO roundtables and books and things like that, it complements that.
So you mentioned the time frame. It's quite intentional, the time frame. So the thing I want to know is, how did you want your listener to feel after they had listened to an episode?
Yeah, two things. And again, that was deeply intentional when Michelle and I, again, reflect on our own experiences. If you listen to each of the episodes, you can see that the episodes are structured around being issues-based. So they're a specific issue or topic that we target. It's not very generic. So we wanted CEOs to listen to that and feel, oh, somebody's actually talking about the things that I'm experiencing. And they're talking about it from the CEO's perspective, not from sort of a leadership expert or subject matter expert perspective. So we wanted them to feel, oh, someone's talking about what I'm experiencing or what I'm thinking or my concerns are. So there was that as the first intention. And then the second intention, because it is issues-based, we wanted CEOs to be able to finish it off with some clear actions that they can take almost immediately. So when you listen to the structure, there is a bit of a sum up of these are the things that you can do.
I have to say, I have found that practical component really helpful, and I have directed a number of people to it, particularly a couple of, after some feedback recently about a young CEO, as in stepping into the role. And I said, well, maybe you might want to share, particularly on engaging with the board. And the CEO rang me up and said, that was really good. So it's, you know, hitting the mark, so to speak.
Thank you. Yeah.
You know, go-to topics with other CEOs are often, you know, relationships with the board, leading your team, service provision to your clients in a way that's meaningful. For you as a leader, what has stretched you the most and why?
My initial reaction when I saw this question straight away, and then I thought about it and I've shifted my response, but I'm going back to my original answer, was the board. Because particularly as a new CEO, and to your example just earlier, you know, a new CEO steps into this new role, working with a board that could be anywhere from 5 to 11, you know, experts in the room that are setting the direction that you need to influence, that are also assessing your behavior and your performance, and you don't get training. There's no sort of like CEO deal with the board training school.
No,
and you learn on the spot. And I was talking to a colleague about this the other day, where I was saying, here's this group of people that you need to influence to get an outcome. So it might be, hey, I need some investment, and here's the great reason why and the outcome that we're going to get as a result. You're also saying to them, please think of me doing a really good job. I'm performing and I'm being effective to the direction that you want me to achieve. But at the same time, you're saying, and here are all the problems that are going on in the organisation that I need you to be aware of, because as the governance structure, you have responsibility about that. So it's really tricky to get that information to a group of people where they all completely understand what you're talking about. I found that really challenging. And every time you add a new director into a board,
you're almost going back to scratch again, because
the dynamic changes
the dynamic.
That's exactly right.
And I don't think you're alone in that experience. Okay, so if we think about from a podcast perspective, what surprised you the most across the feedback that you've got from listeners, the conversations with guests, and the data insights that is sitting underneath the podcast as well?
The first thing that surprised me was people listened. I say this to people when they come up and speak to me about the podcast. I'm like, always, thank you. It's not just my husband who's listening to it, because I told him. But it's not just CEOs in Australia that are listening. We can actually see where our listeners come from, and the US is our second largest listening group. So we have this global audience that we just didn't even imagine or even anticipate. So that was the surprising one. The other thing with the data that you can see is these topics that get the most downloads really quickly.
Okay.
And the topics around working with your board always get very high downloads. And again, to that point earlier, and then the new CEO that you spoke about, that is a real concern or need that CEOs are really seeking some support or advice in terms of, how do I work with my board, or how do I do my CEO report, or, should my executive come to a board meeting, those sorts of things. So those topics get really good download. And then the second most popular topics that get really good downloads is also about culture.
Okay.
Yeah. So one, how to fix culture, or how to know when culture is not being effective or is declining, those sorts of things.
Well, that's a perfect segue to my next question, which is psychological safety. Very topical with the legislation. It's definitely at the board table as much as it is at the executive table. And, your side explicitly encourages people to speak up, and it offers whistleblower protections and confidentiality provisions. It's one thing to have a policy on a website or a document in a folder, but how do you bring that to life, and how do you genuinely create a culture of psychological safety?
So if we're talking specifically around whistleblower being a bit of a channel of which people can report issues or concerns safely, there's a couple. We've had a whistleblower policy in place for a couple of years. Most corporations have had to legally have had that in place. But over the last couple of years, what we have been doing is raising the profile of that policy being in the organisation. And the way that we actually do that is there are monthly reminders to our staff to say, hey, there's a whistleblower policy. This is how you actually report. So we actually automated that into our system, so the team gets a notification about that. We also do employee pulse surveys twice a year, and one of the questions that we ask is, if there was an issue or a concern, do you know how to report that, or do you know where you can report that to? And that's anonymous, so we can see whether people are actually aware. So is there an awareness across the organisation? And then, of course, we have those practices around staff supervision and reflective practice, where the team leader or the manager is also asking, are you aware that this is available? Are there any concerns you would like to flag with me? There's those channels as well that people can actually go through.
So it's actually just embedded into the cadence and the rhythm at multiple levels in your organisation.
Yeah.
Okay, so engagement surveys you talked about, they come out every 6 months, but as a leader, what signals do you get that trust is weakening before you get the engagement survey?
Yeah, so data is obviously a lag. Engagement surveys are a lag indicator. It comes down to sensing, I think. There's sort of this gut instinct, again, which is not something that people train you on in terms of trusting.
Of being a leader, right?
That's exactly right. So it doesn't feel academic, but it's just as critical.
Yep.
And I think there are some important indicators, is that when things go quiet,
Right. Okay.
So you know as a CEO when something gets to you, well, I think a good CEO, by the time something gets to you is that your team has tried everything that they can to resolve it, and now they need to bring you in for either direction or decision or guidance. But you know, if my team stopped bringing things to me, I would be really concerned. Are they actually, is something being hidden? So that would be the first indicator is the silence. I think it gets, you know, when we used to all be in the same office, it's much easier. You could walk around, you can talk to people, you get the vibe. I think now that we've got remote and hybrid workforces, that gets a little bit more challenging as to how much are people being quiet because they're busy, or people actually trying to hide things. I think it's also being really conscious of not, you know, talking about systems and structures around whistleblower is we really also consciously have not included KPIs within our performance metrics for individuals, because that creates perverse behaviours or perverse incentives for people. So it becomes a collective KPI.
A collective KPI. Well, that's an interesting one, because you don't often hear about that.
No. So, and again, that's about the art of leadership. How do we get everybody on the same journey, heading in the same direction, celebrating the success as a collective rather than the individual?
Because when you said that initially, my first thought was, so how do we measure outcomes?
We still do.
You still do. You just do it as a collective. So topic change a little bit. You speak openly about living with low vision and use your lived experience to promote accessibility. How's that shaped your leadership, firstly? And secondly, how has it informed how you approach your podcast?
Well, I did a solo episode on my podcast around disability inclusive leadership.
That one.
No, that's okay. Michelle and I did a couple of solo episodes. Mine was on disability inclusive leadership, which was really intentional, because then I felt that it was important that knowing that we've got leaders, I'm in the ear of leaders, and I have this opportunity to provide insight and influence to them as a person who is both a leader and a person living with disability. So I can bring two lenses to that topic and that conversation. So that was super interesting. That got really high downloads as well. I wasn't quite sure how that would go. In terms of how does it influence my own leadership, I think, you know, there's a dual piece here. Apart from being a person who has a disability, I've also worked in the disability and care sector for the majority of my career. So I don't actually separate them. I can't tell you how much of my disability has influenced my leadership as opposed to how much of my career has influenced my leadership in that sector.
They blended.
That's right.
They blended.
Yeah.
Okay. Alrighty. So I think people are striving to make their workplaces more accessible. But what's the one change that you think leaders can make immediately to their businesses to make them businesses or their services more accessible?
The first thing, and I talk about this in the podcast episode as well, is directly to leaders. Suspend everything you know about disability. And there's a reason behind that. We live in a world where we think we know about people with disability based on a diagnosis, a clinical diagnosis. And I tell this story about, three people with the same clinical diagnosis of their impairment. So one is me. I can't tell you the name of the diagnosis. It's in Latin and it's very long. Another one is my husband. We have the same clinical diagnosis, and another one is an industry colleague. We've got the same diagnosis. My husband had treatment. His treatment was successful. I had the same treatment. Part of my treatment was successful, and my colleague didn't have treatment because he had other health issues, and so his treatment went to those other health issues. Same diagnosis, different outcomes. So, and those different outcomes were informed or influenced by other external factors that, say, for me as a child, were outside of my control and possibly outside of my parents' control too. So if somebody looked at my diagnosis and made an assumption on it, they would probably be wrong. Not because of the diagnosis, but because of the effectiveness of its treatment.
So this is an extra question I have for you. So if it's suspend what you think you know,
yes,
what's the step after that?
Then it's actually about asking questions, having a conversation. So, we all think we know what a person with an intellectual disability needs for supports, or a person with autism, etc. And in the main, we're probably getting elements of that right. Yeah. But if we actually have an employee who has a disability, then it's a direct conversation about what their support needs are.
So it's two things. So one is an orientation as an organisation to putting accessibility at the forefront of how you do business. Yeah. And then the second one is if you have an employee that needs, don't make assumptions about what their needs are.
Absolutely.
Great.
And let them lead that conversation as well. I mean, obviously open the door for the conversation, but then let that individual lead. Because in a lot of situations, a person with a disability already has immediate adaptations that they've made in their life, and they may not need more. Or it might be they've got those adaptations, but they just need the organisation to support those more overtly.
Okay, thank you. So I think this is the question everybody wants to know. You're running a significant organisation and you're also building a platform for sector leadership. How do you make the podcast coexist with your CEO responsibilities?
The best part of doing the podcast is that it's not just me and Michelle who are talking, although there are episodes where it is Michelle and I having a conversation. You just get to hear two CEOs having a chat. But we also bring in subject matter experts and other leaders in as well. And so being able to have this avenue or access to all of these other experts and leaders on topics that perhaps my day job would not actually create. And I feel so lucky that in having these conversations, I'm learning as well. Michelle and I do a lot of preparation. We sort of frame out the topic, we go and do research, then we do our own self-reflection on our part of that particular topic, and then we engage an expert or we have a conversation. I feel like every episode is like a micro-credential for me. I'm learning all the time, so I get so much value from it.
So I think the one thing I want to share with our listeners, what you haven't said, this is actually Danielle's Sunday job.
Yes.
And
it's the weekend.
It's the weekend, but it doesn't feel like an obligation.
No.
Because you're learning.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I'm stimulated by what I'm capturing and developing as a result of that. Now, I could obviously go and do another course as well, but I don't have as much creative control over that. I get some creative influence over the podcast, which also stimulates me.
So I think you've answered my next question, which was the synergies between the two.
Yes.
So I'm just bringing the conversation to a close. I've got some quick fire questions for you. So CEOs are very busy.
Yes.
What is the one thing that every CEO should fiercely protect, even in the busy season?
Their personal time. Okay. And I was very quick in that response because it's very easy, I think, as a CEO to be on all the time. Yep. And you need to be really mindful that you cannot run a marathon at a sprint pace. And being really intentional about your personal time, which is your rest and restoration, actually makes you a better leader.
And you've done some podcasts specifically around this topic as well.
Absolutely. Yes. And particularly spoke with Chief Mental Health Officer Kate Connors, who's a psychologist, who similarly talks about, very much protecting your personal time.
Yep. Thank you. So a belief around leadership that you've changed your mind over?
So anyone who knows me knows that my background or my family is a Defence Force family. Yes. So you grow up very much observing leadership in the day-to-day, spending a lot of time on base, and then obviously it comes home as well. So you think that command control is the leadership style. You learn very quickly when you're in leadership that command control gets you so far and is not sustainable or effective long-term. So I had to release that idea.
Best advice you've received from a board or a chair?
There was two. There was a particular situation where the organisation was going through some significant change and strain, and I remember having a conversation with my chair at the time and on the phone while I was driving, and she just said, "Danielle, stop, breathe." And I was glad that she could see that I was sort of working and thinking and talking really quickly, and just said, "Breathe," and that was really helpful. In that moment. The other one is another chair had said to me, you know, "Danielle, you need to consider that you're a custodian of this role. You sit in that chair for a period of time. So don't make it everything. Don't make this job everything for you." And that was really important, because that really shifted my thinking around not just the sustainability and the future of the organisation, but succession planning. What happens when I'm not here?
Somebody else I've interviewed has brought that up as well, that concept of being a custodian of a brand. And it lines up with systems thinking as well, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You know, you're here in the system at a point in time.
This point in time.
Yeah. I think my closing question, and appropriate for what you said, has got the most downloads. What is the one thing that you wish every board understood about the CEO role?
I think it's first important to know that not every director has been a CEO.
Yes.
So that means you can have a number of directors in the room who actually don't know what you do day to day, because they've not lived that experience. So I think in that context, sometimes I just, CEOs are busy. We are both strategic and operational, and we move between that muscle all the time. And boards often come with, "Well, just do this," or "What about this?" And, it's the reflection of, are you adding one more thing? And what's the consequence of that on the organisation in terms of resourcing and resilience? Or are you asking, if you're saying yes to that, what are you saying no to? And be really clear that what you're saying no to, you're consciously and purposely saying no to it, because this other thing is much better.
Yes, I think you actually talk about that on one of your podcasts as well, because that's a conversation we've had around the boardroom table.
Yes.
A lot of organisations are restructuring, they're losing staff.
Yes.
8 people cannot do the work of 10 people. So what do you have to say? No, that goes on the back burner. What are we going to bring forward? When do we revisit that? So I think it lines up very much with that.
Yeah.
Danielle, this has been fabulous. Thank you so much for your time. For those that are interested in the podcast in particular, I will share links to it. And the thing I'd like to draw your attention, something that I find really valuable, is that there are transcripts and articles on the website as well, because I'm a reader, not a listener, because I read faster than I listen. And so please go and check it out. And thank you for your time, and thank you for joining us today.